Welcome to Podsauce. I'm Dax Holt.
I am Alicia Renee.
And I'm very excited for our next guest. We got Ginni Saraswati. She is the host of The Ginni Show and a really fun guest. We've been talking to her off air. Amazing accent. I'm so excited to talk to you. Welcome to Podsauce, Ginni.
Thank you, Dax. Thank you, Alicia, for having me. I love the energy you two have, and I love your couches too. I'll have to call you about those later because they look very, very comfortable.
It's what we do.
They are.
Yeah.
They are comfy. They are our second home. We appreciate it.
We're here. We're in here. Butt prints are cemented in the seats, but we welcome you to our guest seats that we have fresh.
So, Ginni, tell me more about the Ginni Show and kind of the concept behind it. Give us a little rough draft of what this show is.
Sure. So, Dax, when I started the show in 2016, I just got off radio. So I had a morning show in Australia on and off for 10 years. And I thought, okay, I want to do something new now. And I saw podcasting trending around the time. So if you were a breakfast radio host, as we call them in Australia, around the early 2000 period, which I was, you used to get all of your interviews that you had on the morning show popped up onto iTunes. So for example, if we interviewed a celebrity, they would be they'd cut that interview, they'd pop it onto iTunes, and voila, you are a podcaster as a consequence of being a radio host. I'm like, actually, I want to do my own thing now because it opened up a whole world and a whole new spectrum of audiences. So I'm like, okay, this is really interesting. I wonder what I can create here from scratch. So the Ginni Show started off as primarily an autobiographical journey of what it was like to grow up as a gay Sri Lankan immigrant girl in Australia with lots of aunties and cousins. And it just became this kind of autobiographical comedic narrative. I could just talk and really make fun of my aunties without them knowing I'm making fun of them.
But it's also very informative. That's the one thing. Like, you joke right now, but I feel that I also learned a lot based on some of the guests that you've had on the podcast, people that you bring on, because you're having real life conversations about what's happening in the world. Is that correct?
That is correct. That's a great observation there, Dax, because when I started the show, like I said, it was more like, okay, this is like a creative outlet for me, and this is a way that I can kind of entertain and kind of express myself. But it took a shift where I'm like, actually, people have so many interesting stories. Like, I might think mine is interesting and, I'll put it out there for people to listen if they want to. But to your point, there are so many people who've gone through so many things and experiences, and they've got a lot to share about them. So I kind of took a pivot in season 3 and 4. I'm like, actually want to talk to other people and hear about what they've got going on. And the lessons and teachings that they've shared have been invaluable. So I love learning. I think I'll be a perpetual student till I die. Because I love learning new things and hearing about different experiences, because I think it really does help you reflect and, refine and keep going in a way. So that's what the Ginni Show is really all about at the moment.
You know what I love about, one, just you come from 3 different marginalized communities. One, you're a woman, you're a member of the LGBTQIA+ community, and you're a woman of color. How do you refer to yourself as a woman of color? First of all, I just put that on you. Do you refer to yourself as a woman of color?
I do.
You know, you got to ask that, girl. You got to ask. I was like, hold on. Hold on before I put labels on her. How do you find your voice to properly represent all of those hats that you wear, all those different identities?
Gosh, Alicia, you're firing.
I'm coming at you this morning, boo.
I love it.
You had your Earl Grey tea. I know for a fact you did. So let's go.
I think I need a Red Bull now, Alicia, for that question. But I think, no, that is a great question, because I feel like I'm from Sri Lanka. I was born there. We moved to Australia when I was 2. I was the brown kid. And I remember when I was growing up in school, in Australia, they were like, why are you brown? And Beyonce wasn't around then. I couldn't be like, yo, I woke up like this, right? I had to be like, actually, why am I brown? And then it was just this whole figuring out of a process of, okay, where do I fit in? How do these values shape me? I'm growing up in this country, but my family speaks a different language at home and we eat different foods and my lunchbox looks different to Beth's. And there was this whole process, right? But to your point, Alicia, I think when there's I'm kind of a 1% in a 1% in a 1%. I remember I did a recent interview and someone said, you really are a minority in a minority in a minority. And it does feel that way. But I feel that I have such a different and unique background. And I think this is where I was going back to my previous point to the question Dax asked. Everybody has a very unique story, and you may fit into multiple communities and multiple experiences or shared experiences, but every part is unique. I'm sure, like, there's not many people on this earth who can say, hey, I've met a Sri Lankan born, Australian raised, LGBTIQ person of color who runs a company in New York. I don't think many people could say that, right?
Right.
So that's what makes like certain experiences different. But I feel sometimes that, when people say that to me, it's also an honor for me to be able to have the voice, the means, the resources to share my experiences and stories in a way that my ancestors didn't. I know my mum, she had to learn English in a way that it was just given to me. Like, I know that I'm privileged in certain ways that my ancestors weren't, or, my family weren't when they migrated. So it's not something I take lightly, but it's also something I'm also figuring out too. Like, I don't have all the answers to be a wise lesbian, but I'm figuring it out, as we go along.
Not a wise lesbian, all my sage wisdom. But I do think that that's one of the things that I love about you, and that I like to tip my hat to you about, is that you are also a media company, Ginni Media. How do you, which is totally relevant for our show as a podcast discovery show, how do you decipher what content you feel will be best filtered through your media platform?
It's interesting because when I started off, I was working with a lot of clients here in New York, and the topics here that people discuss in America were different to what I was, what I was used to in Australia as well. So I'm like, okay, it's interesting. Typically, I found that I was working with a lot of entrepreneurs, people who had similar journeys to what I did, or similar visions of how they want their life to be, or what kind of life they wanted to create. So typically we work with a lot of entrepreneurs. We also work with a lot of corporate brands. We have a lot of Fortune 500 companies that we work closely with and we produce for. But primarily it's people who have something pretty interesting that they want to share. To the person who's like, hey, I'm just in this cubicle designing this really cool thing that drives itself or flies itself, and I want to tell someone about it. Anybody going to listen? Can you help me? So it's from that person to the high level visionary who's like, I've got this vision for the future of how it's going to look. And I think everybody will be elevated, able to experience or be, in a sense, served in this vision in some way. So that's kind of the people that we work with, and the content gets put out that way too.
But why podcasting? Why do you feel that podcasting can bridge communities unlike any other medium out there?
Podcasting, I feel, is, and this is something that we were taught in radio school, it's one of those mediums that's it's such an intimate medium, and I think that's not talked about enough. Like, you are literally in someone's ear when you're listening to a podcast, right? How many people do you let that close to you? It's less than one hand typically, right? Like, you actually trust to let into your personal space. And the other part of podcasting or audio in general is that when you listen to a piece of audio, whether it be a podcast or like, or even a radio show, you're typically by yourself. It's not something you do on a Friday night over popcorn and be like, hey, I'm going to invite everybody over and we're going to listen to this podcast. It's such an intimate experience, and you typically get your audience one-on-one, which I think in the world that we live in today, where attention is at such a scale and content is at such a scale, where we're being bombarded with information, content, and all those sorts of things, it's podcasting that really offers that depth, right? That ability or that platform to have that one-on-one connection with your listener. And I think that's why I went all into podcasting too, because if you look at the world, and the pandemic's only just accelerated this, time is of the essence, right? We want to pack in as much as we can to our day. And audio is the only platform, if you're blessed with all the senses, of all 5 senses, you can read, write, and watch something. You can only consume media in 3 ways. You can read it, you can watch it, or you can listen to it. And listening, i.e. podcasting or audio media, is the only way that you can do something, listen to something while doing something else. Like, you can't do that with reading. You have to give the book your full and undivided attention, or the blog your full and undivided attention. And same with video. Like, you can't watch a YouTube video or drive, although some people do it, and I don't recommend that.
I don't.
So it's just one of those things, right? It's attention and it's depth and it's connection. I think podcasting and audio media really is, shaping the future that way as well.
I love that answer. We have interviewed a lot of people on this show, and I've never broke it down into that just depth. And I think it's so true that podcasting is something that is intimate with your audience, and
it gives something to you without taking away. Like, you still maintain your time because you're able to.
And I'm realizing we let way too many people in our ears.
1,000%. 1,000%.
When you said like 5 people, I was like, oh, we're letting a lot of people in our ears.
Turn it off. But you know what, Ginni? I'm really glad that Dax asked the question that he did about podcasting affording a space for you to put your voice out there. I also love the episode that you had about broaching difficult conversations, right? Which I feel is paramount as an LGBTQIA advocate. There are certain things that I'm learning every single day because I'm a guest to that house, right? But I want to be a good guest. I don't want to be the guest that's like, 3-day-old fish and it's got to go. Got to get up out of here. And it was such a beautiful episode just with how to broach conversations that may be challenging. One of the first things that we discussed in our very early episodes on this show was pronouns. Finding the space and the capacity to ask someone what are their preferred pronouns. Was this your reasoning for wanting to have the Ginni Show out there, to be able to provide a space where people can ask questions and you can have guests on that could help facilitate heavier conversations?
Well, Alicia, you've just broken it down into such a beautifully packaged down
I be
way.
trying, boo.
No, I love it. I love it. That is one of the things. The reason I created the Ginni Show was to have that point of connection. I think it's ironic for me growing up as a Sri Lankan girl and, going through my teens and my early 20s, the only famous Sri Lankan that I knew was named MIA, which stands for missing in action. So I'm isn't that ironic? The only Sri Lankan, the most famous Sri Lankan I know is MIA. And there's all these political stuff with, the civil war in Sri Lanka. MIA was Tamil. I'm Sinhalese. Not that I see that as a division or I hold anything against MIA about that. But certain things like that, it's just a point of connection. I don't think everybody's experience is one way. And I think before the internet, boomed into its maturity, we were kind of only shown a certain way to be or a certain path to walk. And I think with the Ginni Show and that difficult conversation episode was that I think as humans, we do everything to avoid difficult conversations. And what we actually find is that ultimately we have to end up having a conversation. Yeah. We just take the longer way to get there, right? But I think if we can actually say, hey, let's just be brave. Let's experience some kind candor and let's actually be honest and have this conversation. Let's just put our big girl pants on or our big boy pants on or our big gender non-conforming, non-binary pants on and be like, yo, let's just have this conversation today. And you find that peace comes quicker. I find that we've been trained to circumvent our own inner peace. And I'm like, actually, no, let's just cut through that and go straight to peace. Yeah. And that sounds very Saraswati wisdom there, but it's the truth. I find that the more energy we put into circumventing our peace, the more of our peace we sacrifice. And ultimately, it takes a longer time to get there. So pronouns were one of those things because my company's remote. We're all over the world and different cultures have different belief stance, expressions of pronouns or anything, just work-life balance. There's so many cultural nuances we have to kind of break through, but I think it's important. And what I've learned through what I do, which is audio media or audio media production, and what you guys do too, is we offer this platform for people to be seen and heard, right? And that's what we do. And, Oprah said this before, no matter who she's interviewed, from your Beyoncé's to your Obamas, at the end of that conversation, it's like, did you hear me? Did you see me? That was what because they were like, was that okay? I think every human being wants to be seen and heard. And I think that if we can figure out as human beings how to get to that point where we can see and hear ourselves first and foremost, and then also allow that space for other people to be seen and heard, I think we'll be a lot happier, don't you think?
So,
you can add boxing in there and sleep and a lot of things, but mainly
not boxing and sleep.
Boxing in your sleep.
Boxing in your sleep. No, I love that Leash brought up that episode because I listened to that episode and I felt like I walked away with some really good tips. And I feel like there's always going to be topics in your life that are hard to bring up with another person. If you're upset, if you're angry, and you want to talk and you don't know how to. This was such a good episode, and I'm like, I know different ways to talk to my parents or to my wife or to my kids, and things that it's not easy, guys. There's a lot of things that make you mad in this world,
Yeah.
and you want to have that conversation, you don't know how, and other people are not the best conversationalists.
Yeah.
And trying to have that without upsetting someone. I mean, it was just broken down so perfectly. So I want to put up a link to that
for
episode of 4 Steps to Conducting Tough Conversations.
Yeah,
for
for
sure.
sure.
It was good.
I think it's too, like, as we migrate into a space where we're putting healthier boundaries around us, but also leaving room for people to broach if they have a question, issue, problem, or concern, especially with the uprising as it pertains to racial injustice or sexual identity, and people wanting to be able to be heard and seen. And if you're not familiar, if you're talking about a community that may not be your own, to say there is grace in saying, pardon my ignorance, but what does this mean? Or pardon my ignorance, but how do I say, because I'm really good for a pardon my ignorance, because let me tell you something, there are a lot of things that I don't know. And I'll say, pardon my ignorance, but da-da-da-da. And I think that just, if you agree, because I and don't think I didn't catch you coining the Saraswati-ism. I heard that. Heard it, wasn't gonna let you get away with it. But let me know if you think that that's also a gentle way to just set the atmosphere of, I don't know this, give me grace in my ignorance.
100%. I think there's been, again, Alicia, you're like firing the good questions here. The great point that you made there is it comes back to, like, we're all human, right? And the expectation to know everything sometimes is a lot of pressure to carry. Like, I will be the first to say I don't know everything about everything, right? I don't think anybody knows everything about everything. I think that's a fair statement to put out there, right? And I think when we're going into certain spaces or places where we're not completely familiar with cultures or completely familiar, like you said, with certain things, we don't know what we don't know. And to put your hand up and say, hey, pardon my ignorance, can you please, I'm unsure how to say this. I think it's okay to say that. And it also opens up the door for people to be like, actually, yeah, this is what it is. Now, I think there's a different energy and there's a different dialogue about this too. I don't think that should be everybody's responsibility. I think you need to take some responsibility on yourself to be like, okay, yep, so this person taught me this. I'm going to go now do my due diligence and do a little bit of research or ask some questions or what I need to do. But I think it's important to have that space for permission to be like, yo, is it okay? I'm a little bit ignorant to this. I think that's the start of building a bridge, right? You don't want to burn down any bridges, or you don't want to create barriers. And I think what you said before, like, when we have certain boundaries, sometimes we feel boundaries are barriers, but boundaries are actually a bridge between us and other people. So I think it's very important to actually acknowledge your own humanity so you can also acknowledge other people's humanity too. So that's the act of saying, hey, I don't know. So that's a great point.
So Ginni, I am very excited to be promoting your show and talking about your show. Are there any podcasts that you would like to recommend other people listening to, things that you're enjoying out there?
Podsauce. I would recommend, I actually love a few. I love Messy and Magnificent. She's one of my clients, Carly Fain. She talks about this very thing of boundaries and how boundaries are a bridge. They're not a barrier. So that's a great podcast to listen to.
Say that again.
I love Messy and Magnificent because it's acknowledging that we can be one thing and another. It doesn't have to be this or that. And again, it creates this notion of there's room. You can be excited and exhausted, right? You could be like on the best tour of your life and you could be so excited, but you're also exhausted. And you're also exhausted. I have to catch myself saying that too, because sometimes when we say but, we cancel out and we close the door into the room for that emotional feeling. That's a great one. I love Modern Love. I love the original series more than the current ones, but I love Modern Love. I think it's a genius concept from the production side to how it's executed. I think it's genius.
Did you see the series?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
I watched a couple of episodes.
Yeah.
It's just so interesting. Like, because you listen to him, and again, that intimacy experience, like, I did not picture him to look that way in my head. Is this a miscast? And I love it because I know every person who listened to Modern Love had their own casting in their head, right? Because of who was reading the show or whatnot. So that was a particularly interesting experience. I love On Purpose with Jay Shetty. I love, I love Brene Brown's podcast. there's so many that I listen to, but I love podcasts that I can put into my ear and get taken away into, like, I'm just sitting on a coffee table with someone and just talking in the conversation. I love those sorts of podcasts to listen to.
I'm going to check out On Purpose with Jay Shetty. I'm going to take your recommendation because I actually follow him on the gram. And it's just such a fascinating story of him being a monk and then like now living his best life. Is he a best-selling author? I believe I didn't misread that. Okay, but such a beautiful way to like speak about peace and joy and self-fulfillment and happiness and finding balance and boundaries. So, the Ginni Show, dropping gems. Was that a Saraswati-ism?
Oh, there you go. I didn't hire you as a writer. Like, you were just on fire.
Ginni Saraswati, host of The Ginni Show. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. You know what? We're going to put a link to that. What's that episode you and I both ended up listening to?
It was 4 Steps for Conducting Tough Conversations.
Definitely
so
have
good.
to put a link up.
Good.
So good. Definitely have to put a link up to that particular episode. Yeah, because that's just what we do right here on Podsauce.